Good morning. I'm Leslie Kennedy, NCSL's Director of Publications and Digital Media, and welcome to NCSL's first State Legislature Spotlight, a short inside look at a State Legislatures magazine feature story, which is part of our newly digital magazine experience. While we'll still be bringing you 2 special edition print issues a year from the magazine you know and love, members can now look forward to fresh daily content available on our webpage at ncsl.org/magazine. This month's Spotlight looks at how legislative leaders are pivoting to non-virus challenges in the spirit of cooperation. We're here today with Alan Greenblatt, a senior writer at Governing and the author of this story. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I've interviewed so many people at NCSL over the years. It's nice to be interviewed by you. Thank you.
Well, so to say that state legislative sessions this year were different is a huge understatement. What similarities did you uncover in learning how legislators have been leading during this unprecedented time?
It was really interesting. I had the chance to speak to about a half dozen chamber leaders around the country, Republicans and Democrats, both the House and Senate, and the stories were really almost identical just because everyone was facing the same challenges, the logistics of holding sessions remotely or coming back in during a time of pandemic, worrying about safety, suddenly facing huge budget challenges. Everybody was dealing with a new set of issues. The way they thought the year would go was suddenly thrown out the window, and everyone was having to face similar problems.
Yeah, and you write that lawmakers have changed their focus in recent months. Can you explain that?
Well, just as I was saying, that the typical mix of issues of education and criminal justice, which is back on the radar now, and infrastructure, all that was sort of put aside because of the need to respond to the health challenge, and then the need to figure out how to write budgets when revenues were falling off a cliff. And I was actually surprised how many said they're still doing policy legislation. I thought there'd be no bandwidth for anything else, but they said we're still running a state. There's still issues that need to be addressed, but if they cost money or if they were contentious or too partisan, a lot of those things were put aside just because of the urgency of the emergency situation.
Interesting. Now, the idea of constituent service seems to have emerged as a common theme among legislators. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and what they're seeing?
Yeah, well, constituent service in general is just helping people who live in your district navigate government agencies. If you're running into a snag, sometimes you call legislative office to help you. Well, people are running into a lot of snags, most especially with unemployment. Trying to apply for unemployment, the software systems were not built for the sudden huge increase in applications. There are other problems. Constituents were dealing with all the things you'd expect, trying to figure out how to get personal protective equipment. Just the whole laundry list. And from a leader's perspective, what they ended up having to do is try to coordinate among their members so that each legislator wasn't calling the same agency with the same questions. You had legislators setting up Zoom calls so that all the legislators could be on at once asking the same questions, where they sort of collect and collate the common problems and then go as leadership to the agency to try to get answers. Just because everyone was suddenly dealing with the same set of questions, they were trying to keep the executive branch people from being overwhelmed with queries. But that became a huge focus.
Yeah, and just the idea of remote leadership really intrigues me. How do you think that remote leadership seems to be working out? I know one of your sources in the story talked about the challenges and how it's actually brought a new level of cooperation, which I found really interesting. Do you think that seems to be the norm, or was that surprising to you at all?
Well, I think there is sort of a spirit of camaraderie. I mean, people who go into public service, of course, want to help people. And this is a situation where people need help. They're looking for guidance. But, just as a practical level, I mean, we're doing this interview remotely through our computers, and we're all used to this now. Many meetings a day, held online and not in person. And so for chamber leaders, a lot of them are in more contact with their fellow legislators right now than they would be normally. For instance, If you're in a state like Indiana that had a short session this year, you would just go home and you'd keep in touch and have some interim committees and that kind of thing. But you would say, well, we'll see you next January. And instead, everyone is having to rush to help, and so they're staying in pretty much constant touch. And they are having, everyone is scattered around the state, but they are able to gather virtually. And so that's what I meant. That there's both a spirit of being in it together, and also the technical ability to meet remotely, which, if this had happened 10 years ago, I think it would be a different situation.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you joining us this morning, Alan. Thank you so much for taking the time. And for those that want to read the full story, I encourage you to head to ncsl.org/magazine, and to be sure to tune in next month for another NCSL State Legislature Spotlight. Thanks again, Alan. It was great chatting with you this morning.
My pleasure.